Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, September 12, 2024. Attorney General Merrick Garland says the Justice Department will not bend to political pressure, and he will not allow the department to be used as a political weapon. And he warns about conspiracy theories and dangerous falsehoods targeting federal law enforcement. The speech comes as former President Donald Trump has continued to accuse the Justice Department of singling him out for prosecution and to threaten that, if he wins the presidency, to put in prison those he said cheated in the election. Donald Trump today says he will not debate Kamala Harris again. Kamala Harris calls for another debate. The U.S. House finishes the week with no clear path yet for a government funding measure to prevent a shutdown come October. Speaker Mike Johnson says discussions will continue through the weekend. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana says after Hurricane Francine ripped through the state, we'll get the money that we deserve from the federal government to help us. That's why we pay taxes. House passes a bill to prohibit the electric vehicle tax credit from being claimed if the EV has batteries manufactured by Chinese entities. We'll get the latest on allowing Ukraine to use Western nation-supplied long-range weapons to strike Russian territory beyond the immediate border with Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken asked about it again. And former U.S. Senator James Sasser, Democrat of Tennessee, has died. We'll hear part of a C-SPAN interview when he was in office about his growing up in Tennessee. Attorney General Merrick Garland, writes CNN, slammed efforts to turn the Justice Department into a political weapon during a fiery speech Thursday to department staff and U.S. attorneys from across the country amid attacks from former President Donald Trump and his allies. The Attorney General's comments come as Trump has claimed that the Justice Department has been weaponized against him amid his criminal prosecutions and suggested that he would politicize the department should he return to the Oval Office. That was from CNN. Attorney General Garland spoke at the Justice Department headquarters in Washington, D.C.
There is not one rule for friends and another for foes, one rule for the powerful and another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, or different rules depending on one's race or ethnicity. To the contrary, we have only one rule. We follow the facts and apply the law in a way that respects the Constitution and protects civil liberties. Over the past 3.5 years, I have spoken to you often about the importance of these norms. I know that to many outside of this department, they may seem abstract or even inconsequential. They are anything but, and they must not be taken for granted. For us, adhering to these policies, principles, and norms in everything we do is how we fulfill the promise that is foundational to our democracy, that all people will be protected equally under the law, and that all people will be held accountable equally under the law. Our norms are a promise that we will fiercely protect the independence of this department from political interference in our criminal investigations. Our norms are a promise that we will not allow this department to be used as a political weapon. And our norms are a promise that we will not allow this nation to become a country where law enforcement is treated as an apparatus of politics.
Attorney General Merrick Garland at the Justice Department today. The speech was titled, Attorney General Merrick B. Garland Addresses the Justice Department Workforce. Attorney General Garland also spoke today about what he called dangerous conspiracy theory-driven attacks against hardworking department staff.
In addition to seeing how you have operated in the face of dangers like violent crime and terrorism, I have also seen how you have bravely carried on in the face of an unprecedented spike in threats targeting a range of public officials across the country. Over the past 3.5 years, there has been an escalation of attacks on the Justice Department's career lawyers, agents, and other personnel that go far beyond scrutiny, criticism, and legitimate and necessary oversight of our work. These attacks have come in the form of conspiracy theories, dangerous falsehoods, efforts to bully and intimidate career public servants by repeatedly and publicly singling them out, and threats of actual violence. Through your work, you have made clear that the Justice Department will not be intimidated by these attacks. But it is dangerous and outrageous that you have to endure them. It is dangerous to target and intimidate individual employees of this department solely for doing their jobs. And it is outrageous that you have to face these unfounded attacks because you are doing what is right and upholding the rule of law. You deserve better. You deserve gratitude for the noble and difficult work you do. You deserve recognition for the integrity and skill with which you do that work. You deserve to be honored. The work you do every day makes a difference. And the way you do that work makes clear that the public servants of the Department of Justice do not bend to politics and that they will not break under pressure.
Attorney General Merrick Garland at the Justice Department today. In the 30-minute speech, he did not mention Donald Trump or his allies by name. Donald Trump has been accusing the Justice Department of intentionally targeting him for indictments on the federal level, and he says pressuring state and local prosecutors to do the same. Here is Donald Trump during the ABC News presidential debate Tuesday night.
Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York. Every one of those cases. And then they say, oh, he's a criminal. They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case. And what happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
Donald Trump during Tuesday night's presidential debate hosted by ABC News. Story from USA Today. Officials in Springfield, Ohio closed City Hall Thursday after a bomb threat was issued to multiple facilities, the city said in a news release. The activity comes 2 days after Donald Trump mentioned Springfield, Ohio during the presidential debate when promoting a false rumor that migrants there are eating people's pets. Local officials have previously confirmed the accounts are not true. Again, from USA Today. Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, returned to the campaign trail today. Donald Trump holding a rally in Tucson, Arizona. Kamala Harris has 2 events in North Carolina, in Charlotte and Greensboro. Donald Trump posting on his Truth Social account today, when a prize fighter loses a fight, the first words out of his mouth are, "I want a rematch." Polls clearly show that I won the debate against comrade Kamala Harris, the Democrats' radical left candidate, on Tuesday night, and she immediately called for a second debate. She and Crooked Joe have destroyed our country with millions of criminals and mentally deranged people pouring into the USA, totally unchecked and unvetted. And with inflation bankrupting our middle class, everyone knows this, and all the other problems caused by Kamala and Joe. It was discussed in great detail during the first debate with Joe and the second debate with comrade Harris. She was a no-show at the Fox debate and refused to do NBC and CBS. Kamala should focus on what she should have done during the last almost 4-year period. There will be no third debate. And that last line was in all capital letters. That was the post on Truth Social by Donald Trump. Kamala Harris in Charlotte, North Carolina today said she does want to do another debate.
2 nights ago, Donald Trump and I had our first debate. And I I believe we owe it to the voters to have another debate. Because this election and what is at stake could not be more important. On Tuesday night, I talked about issues that I know matter to families across America, like bringing down the cost of living, investing in America's small businesses, protecting reproductive freedom, and keeping our nation safe and secure. But that's not what we heard from Donald Trump. Instead, it was the same old show. That same tired playbook that we've heard for years, with no plans for how he would address the needs of the American people, because you know it's all about him, it's not about you. Well, folks, I said it then, I say it now. It's time to turn the page. Turn that page.
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, today in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is Washington Today. From TheHill.com, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, said Thursday the Democrats will reject any short-term spending bill that includes Trump-backed policy provisions or kicks the issue of 2025 spending into next year. Behind Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, House Republican leaders had pushed a stopgap spending package known as a continuing resolution, or CR, that extends 2024 spending until March 28th, a 6-month span demanded by some conservatives in the House GOP conference. Legislation also featured a policy rider, the SAVE Act, requiring proof of citizenship for voting nationwide. On Wednesday, Johnson was forced to scrap a scheduled vote on that package because it lacked the GOP support to pass. That was from The Hill. Here's Congressman Jeffries at his weekly news conference today.
I know that you want a clean CR, but now that Speaker Johnson has to go back to the drawing board, do you think Democrats are open at all to a shorter CR with the SAVE Act? Do you think some Democrats could be picked off?
We have zero interest in enacting any part of Trump's Project 2025 agenda. The American people want no part of Trump's Project 2025 agenda, and so the fact that House Republicans are threatening a shutdown and demanding in exchange for keeping the government open the enactment of deeply dangerous and unpopular parts of Trump's Project 2025 agenda is unserious and unacceptable. If they were serious about what they intend to do, then pass the bill themselves. But they've been unable to do that on their own. In fact, can anyone in America name a single thing that House Republicans have been able to do on their own to make a difference in the lives of the American people? A single thing that House Republicans have been able to do on their own? It can't. Why? Because the House Republican agenda is all about a national abortion ban, Trump's Project 2025, and big tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and big corporations. That's the House Republican agenda. And it's deeply unpopular with the American people. Extreme MAGA Republicans are unable to govern on their own. And House Democrats are simply saying, we're willing to partner with you in a bipartisan path forward based on the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act that was passed by both houses of Congress with Democratic and Republican majorities, signed into law by President Joe Biden, and sets top-line spending numbers for fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025. What's the problem? We've already reached an agreement, and the extreme MAGA Republicans are walking away from the agreement that they themselves demanded that we negotiate in order to avoid a catastrophic default on America's debt. So it should not be that complicated, and we need to get this resolved in this calendar year. And if we just let the appropriators do their work, led by Rosa DeLauro on our side, I'm confident that we can reach a bipartisan agreement consistent with the Fiscal Responsibility Act that meets the needs of the American people and keeps the government open.
The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, at his weekly news conference. Speaker Mike Johnson said that talks about the CR will continue among Republicans through the weekend. Congressman Tim Burchett, Republican of Tennessee, was on C-SPAN this morning.
I vote against it. You know, they attach the SAVE Act to it, which provide for preventing foreign folks from voting. We've already passed that actually in July. Chuck Schumer refuses to bring it up. I keep saying to our leadership, why don't we hold a press conference and say every day, just say, why is the Senate not bringing this up? Why are they wanting to allow foreigners to vote in our elections? But the other is the fact that it is a continued resolution, which it continues the bad spending policies, of my opinion, of Schumer and Speaker Pelosi. And you're forcing conservatives like myself to vote for it so they can attach the SAVE Act to it, which we've already passed. I just don't think it's too much inside Washington, inside the ballpark kind of play. I don't think America gives a rip about all that. I don't think they want to shut the government down. I think my conservative base does, and I'm not afraid to do that. We've done it before. But I think going into an election cycle is probably not the best time to do it. And also, again, you're forcing conservatives to vote for horrible spending policies that are in place. We add $1 trillion every 100 days to our debt, and neither party wants to do anything about it. And the dirty little secret is that the Democrats want to do it for so-called woke programs, and the Republicans will do it for missile defense plans. So we're both just going to run up our check card beyond belief, and neither party has a plan to pay it back. And I think it's time to like-minded people to say enough is enough. Will you be part of weekend conversations with the Speaker's office to try to convince you to vote yes? Oh, I'm sure if they call, I'll pick up the phone. But I had a long meeting with Guy Riesenthaler and Tom Emmert yesterday. A group of us did, I think, over an hour. And they were very convincing in why we needed to do this. And there was a lot of, as they say, strategery going on in the room with different members, conservative members. And I think that's how we'll get a solution. But I think ultimately we'll end up passing a big spending package, and no one will make any cuts, and we'll go home and blame both sides, and 99% of us will get reelected. Congressman Tim Burchett, Republican from Tennessee, on C-SPAN's Washington Journal Morning program. From Reuters, a senior U.S. House Republican said on Thursday that his party needs to begin talks with Democrats on funding the government past the September 30th deadline, as Speaker Mike Johnson plotted his next move after pulling a controversial stopgap funding bill. Representative Tom Cole, the Republican chair of the House Appropriations Committee, told reporters that he and others were supportive of what he, Speaker Johnson, is trying to do, but pointed out that the deadline is rapidly approaching. Cole said, "We can't have a government shutdown 5 weeks before an election. There are some things that do need to be negotiated, and the final deal is going to take Democratic votes." That was a story from Reuters. From NOLA.com, down in Louisiana, Hurricane Francine's powerful sweep across Louisiana flooded homes, left hundreds of thousands without power, and raised questions about drainage capacity on Thursday, as parishes covered roughly a third of the state began to assess the damage. The storm made landfall near Morgan City around 5 p.m. Wednesday as a Category 2 with sustained 100-mile-per-hour winds. It had weakened to a tropical depression by Thursday morning with 35-mile-per-hour winds, and its center was near Jackson, Mississippi. The Louisiana governor held a news conference today in Baton Rouge, the capital city, about storm recovery, and joining him was Senator John Kennedy, Republican of Louisiana, who said he expects there'll be federal aid.
There's always something to be grateful for, but that is cold comfort to our people who sustained damage. And we did have damage. A lot of wind, a lot of water, a lot of loss of power. We'll get the money that we deserve from the federal government to help us. That's why we pay taxes, whether it's in the form of public assistance, infrastructure repair, personal assistance, mitigation grants. I've already started talking to my colleagues. The entire congressional delegation is united on this. I sit on appropriations in the Senate. Julia sits on appropriations in the House. But we do it together with all of us. And we will get the money that we need. Number two, our FEMA administrator is here. And I don't see her. Here we are. I want to thank her for coming. Her technical title is administrator. I call her Madam Secretary because it is at a secretary level position, in my opinion. And I want to thank her for coming to Louisiana. It really, really, really means a lot. Number three, I wish you could have just listened and been in the room, listened to what I just listened to. I want to thank the governor. I want to thank his entire team. I want to thank our state and local officials. They are on top of this. And I just wish all of you could have sat there for the hour and listened to what I listened to. The damage would have been much, much worse, but for their professionalism. And it also would have been much, much worse, but for the investment that Louisiana taxpayers and American taxpayers have made in flood protection.
Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference in Baton Rouge, hosted by the governor, Jeff Landry, also Republican. In Washington at the White House, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said President Biden has been monitoring the storm and is providing help.
The president and his senior team are closely monitoring the impacts of Francine as it moves through to the southern United States. FEMA Administrator Criswell is currently in Louisiana. She will meet with state and local officials, survey damages, and provide an update on our response efforts. Before Francine made landfall, the president approved Governor Landry's of Louisiana's request for an emergency declaration, which unlocked federal assistance to help support life-saving and life-sustaining efforts. Over 700 federal personnel, including 128 urban search and rescue personnel, are in Louisiana and ready to support any emergency response requests from the state. FEMA has also pre-positioned more than 750,000 meals, 1.2 million liters of water to support the needs of survivors. We continue to encourage those who are in the path of Francine to stay alert. Visit ready.gov for tips on how to stay safe and follow the recommendations of state and local officials. The Biden-Harris administration stands ready to provide additional support to impacted areas as necessary.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her news conference at the White House. The governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, says there have been no storm-related deaths attributed to Hurricane Francine, and the Louisiana Public Service Commission says there were about 450,000 power outages at the height, down now to about 350,000. Francine is the sixth named hurricane this year. Hurricane season runs through November, although right around now is usually the peak time. Last year there were 19 named storms. Wall Street today, the Dow up 235, NASDAQ up 174, S&P up 41. Story from Associated Press. Members of a Senate committee looking into the Steward Healthcare bankruptcy said they plan to adopt two resolutions next week to hold Steward CEO Ralph De La Torre in contempt, one for civil enforcement and another for certification to the United States Attorney for criminal contempt after he refused to attend a U.S. Senate hearing Thursday, despite being issued a subpoena. If approved, both resolutions will go to the full Senate for a vote. Senator Bernie Sanders, committee chair, said De La Torre and his Texas-based steward which operated about 30 hospitals nationwide and filed for bankruptcy in May, is a prime example of what happens when private equity investors purchase hospitals, strip their assets, and saddle them with debt that they can never pay back. That was reporting from Associated Press. Here is Senator Bernie Sanders.
Working in partnership with the private equity firm Cerebus, Dr. Delatorre became obscenely wealthy by loading up hospitals from Massachusetts to Arizona with billions of dollars in debt and selling the land underneath these hospitals to real estate executives at Medical Properties Trust who charged unsustainably high rents. As a result of Dr. Delatorre's elaborate financial scheme, Steward Healthcare and the more than 30 hospitals it owns in 8 states declared bankruptcy with some $9 billion in debt. But let's be clear, Steward's severe financial problems did not happen overnight. They have been going on for more than a decade. It has been estimated that at least 15 patients at hospitals owned by Steward died as a result of a lack of medical equipment or staffing shortages, and that at least 2,000 other patients were put in serious risk, according to federal regulators.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, his opening statement at today's hearing. He said Ralph Delatorre made hundreds of millions of dollars personally while the hospitals were getting in deeper financial trouble. And the senator had pictures of a yacht, he said, that Delatorre bought for $40 million and a luxury fishing boat for $15 million. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, is the committee's ranking member. He spoke today about that bipartisan support for holding the CEO in contempt of Congress for not testifying under the subpoena.
We need to keep this from happening again. That means we need answers. And it seems the principal to give that answer is Dr. Ralph Delatorre. And this is what our bipartisan work has been about: answers for our constituents, answers to inform legislative solutions. Unfortunately, Dr. Delatorre has refused to testify voluntarily. As a result, the committee issued a subpoena in July. Up until September the 4th, Dr. Delatorre's lawyers indicated he intended to comply with the subpoena and to testify. However, 8 days before the hearing, Dr. Delatorre informed the committee that he would not comply with the subpoena. We responded to Dr. Delatorre explaining why his objections to the committee's subpoena have no merit and directed him to comply. Now, a witness cannot disregard and evade a duly authorized subpoena. Therefore, today, the chair and I will be asking the committee to report a resolution to authorize civil enforcement and criminal contempt proceedings against Dr. Delatorre requiring compliance with the subpoena. I thank the chair for working with me on this critically important issue. I believe our actions today are a testament to what bipartisanship can accomplish on behalf of Americans, on behalf of patients.
Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana and a medical doctor, and he's ranking member on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee at today's hearing. The committee plans to vote on the contempt resolutions next week. Again, from the Associated Press article, in a written statement, Steward defended Delatorre's decision not to attend the hearing and to again ask that it be rescheduled, saying that not only is it inappropriate for him to testify about Steward's bankruptcy while those proceedings are ongoing, but that he's also banned by a federal court from doing so. The statement said the committee continues to ignore the fact that there is an ongoing settlement effort underway with all interested parties that paves the way to keep all of Steward's remaining hospitals open and preserve jobs. Dr. Delatorre will not do anything that could jeopardize this effort. That was from Associated Press. One of the witnesses who did testify at today's hearing was Ellen McInnes, a nurse from Boston's St. Elizabeth's Medical Center, one of Steward's health hospitals.
Sadly enough, sometimes babies die, newborn babies die, and the practice is to place the baby's remains in a bereavement box and take it to the morgue. Steward didn't pay the vendor, and there weren't any bereavement boxes. And nurses were forced to put babies' remains in cardboard shipping boxes. These nurses put their own money together and went to Amazon and brought the bereavement boxes. Gosh, there's so much more to say. Probably the most tragic and what finally blew the lid off all this was the death of a 39-year-old woman who came to the hospital, had an absolutely normal childbirth, was bleeding. She may have been saved by a device known as an embolism coil. There weren't any in the hospital. There hadn't been any in the hospital for weeks. They had been repossessed by the vendor. She died.
Ellen McInnes, a nurse at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Boston, at today's Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee hearing on the bankruptcy of Steward Health Care. You can find the video of the full hearing at our website, cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio is easy. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Important public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays, catch Washington Today. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can listen to as a podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. The U.S. House today passed a bill that would ban the consumer tax credit of up to $7,500 for buying a qualified electric vehicle if the EV has batteries made by or connected with Chinese entities. It was the final bill brought up by the House Republican majority in their China Week, focusing on threats to the U.S. perceived from the Chinese Communist Party. Sponsor of today's bill was Congresswoman Carol Miller, Republican of West Virginia.
This legislation will close the Chinese billionaire loophole that currently allows entities owned by billionaires from countries of concern to benefit from the EV subsidies as long as their ties to these hostile governments are deemed unofficial. The Biden-Harris administration has put out regulations on the EV credit that effectively exclude battery inputs from being subject to any limitations at all. This bill will also ensure none of the components going into the battery are sourced from China. Finally, this bill will prevent companies from benefiting from this tax break if they merely partner with foreign entities of concerned firms without developing any domestic intellectual property or knowledge transfer. I urge my colleagues to vote yes and to choose American taxpayers over Chinese billionaires. The choice is clear.
Congresswoman Carol Miller, Republican of West Virginia, on the House floor. The White House put out a statement in opposition to this bill, saying it would raise taxes on American consumers, punish American auto manufacturers, threaten good-paying auto jobs, undermine our administration's work to protect the American automotive supply chain from unfair Chinese competition, and set back efforts to achieve energy security and combat climate change. And the statement goes on, it would add new unclear and unworkable restrictions to the Inflation Reduction Act Section 30D tax credit, which already includes strict eligibility restrictions for foreign entities of concern controlled by China and other covered nations. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, Democrat from Michigan, agreed with the White House during today's House floor debate.
If this bill passes, it would kill good-paying union auto manufacturing and building trade jobs here. This bill would undermine the United States' ability to compete in a global EV market, and it blatantly ignores the fact that American automakers are already diversifying their supply chains and reducing their reliance on China. I want to remind my colleagues, I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. I was a child in the 70s, but I remember when the domestic auto industry was caught flat-footed. The key to the American auto industry being competitive is we're competing in a global marketplace, not just here. And the global marketplace is demanding EVs. In the 70s, The domestic auto industry wasn't ready for small car vehicles when gasoline prices went up. And we lost a decade. We closed small towns in our state. We've never recovered. Those jobs have never come back. And I am committed with my colleagues in Michigan to keeping our industry competitive in a global marketplace. We cannot make that mistake again.
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, Democrat from Michigan, on the House floor. The House passed this bill, again restricting the up to $7,500 EV tax credit, by a vote of 217 to 192. 7 Democrats joined Republicans in voting yes. Story from the New York Times. Condemnation of a deadly Israeli strike on a school turned shelter in central Gaza mounted on Thursday as Israel said that the complex, crowded with people driven from their homes, had become a headquarters for militants. The site had been home to around 12,000 displaced people from the Gaza Strip, mainly women and children, according to the United Nations, which operated the school. Israel has struck the compound 5 separate times since the war began last October, it said. Palestinian authorities said the Israeli strike on Wednesday killed 18 Gazans. Among them were 6 UN employees, including the shelter's manager, the most UN employees to die in a single strike in Gaza since the war began, the organization said. That was from the New York Times. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked about this strike and the United Nations aid workers being killed. He was at a news conference in Warsaw, Poland.
The first thing that's usually important to underscore is the essential, vital, imperative work of humanitarians in Gaza and, for that matter, around the world. And it's essential that those activities be protected and indeed be facilitated. We need to see humanitarian sites protected. And that's something that we continue to raise with Israel. At the same time, we continue to see Hamas hiding taking over, and otherwise using these sites from which to conduct its operations and to pose an ongoing threat. And that, of course, has to stop because those actions are endangering civilians. I think it also underscores, once again, the urgency of reaching a ceasefire, because that's the best way of ensuring that we have a genuinely protected space throughout Gaza, a space in which the humanitarians can not only continue to do their work, but massively increase it to the benefit of people who desperately need it, the children, the women, and men of Gaza.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a news conference in Poland. Story from Axios. An elite Israeli Defense Forces unit conducted a highly unusual raid in Syria earlier this week and destroyed an underground precision missile factory that Israel and the U.S. claim was built by Iran, according to 3 sources briefed on the operation. Secretary Blinken held this news conference in Warsaw, Poland, with the Polish Foreign Minister, Radoslaw Sikorski. The two also spoke about the war between Ukraine and Russia and reports that a decision has been made to allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the U.S. and other Western countries to hit military targets deep inside Russia itself.
Is there a green light for Ukraine to hit targets deep inside Russia using Western weaponry? There were reports that this decision has already been made. There are also reports that London has given its permission recently. So if you could comment on that. And for Minister Sikorski in Polish, Panie Ministrze, powiedział Pan, że Polska jest za zwiększaniem.
So you said that Poland is in favor of increasing pressure on Moscow. What about the green light for hitting targets inside Russia? What is the impact on Ukraine? What does it mean for Ukraine and for Poland's security?
Thank you very much. Look, a hallmark of what we've done from day one, in fact, even before day one of the Russian aggression against Ukraine in 2022, was to try to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs when it needs it to deal with that aggression. And as what Russia's doing has changed, as the battlefield has changed, we've adapted. And as you've seen through the provision of some of the most sophisticated weapon systems we've had, through the extraordinary provision of military assistance overall, more than $100 billion from the United States, the sharing of intelligence, and many other things, at every step along the way, as necessary, we've adapted and we've adjusted. And one of the purposes of my visit to Kyiv yesterday was to hear from our Ukrainian partners what they believe they need now to deal with the current battlefield, including in eastern Ukraine and other parts of the country. And I can tell you that as we go forward, we will do exactly what we have already done, which is we will adjust, we'll adapt as necessary, including with regard to the means that are at Ukraine's disposal to effectively defend against the Russian aggression.
Russia is committing war crimes, attacking civilian targets, residential areas, hospitals, and facilities which produce electricity and heat for Ukrainians, and the winter is coming. Missiles that hit civilian targets are shot from bombers that start from airfields in Russia. The victim of aggression has the right to defend itself, has the right to combat all means of air strikes that hit against it. I'm of the opinion that Ukraine has the right to use Western weapons to prevent war crimes.
Through an interpreter, the Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, news conference in Warsaw, Poland. At the Pentagon, the press secretary Pat Ryder said there has been no change in policy yet regarding U.S. long-range weapons and Ukraine.
On Ukraine, you've seen in the last day or so Secretary Blinken say that the door may be opening a little bit to the U.S. considering giving Ukraine more long-range strike options or loosening restrictions. But we heard pretty clearly from Secretary Austin last week that he's not in favor of this. Is that thinking changing? Is the building now considering giving Ukraine more long-range strike options?
Yeah, I've certainly seen the press reports on that. I would tell you there has been no change to our policy. I don't have anything to announce, and certainly if there are any changes, we'll let you know. But as of today, that policy has not changed.
What is the primary driver behind Secretary Austin being reluctant to further loosen the restrictions or to provide more long-range options?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, again, this is our policy, right? And we've, of course, worked with the Ukrainians to ensure that they have the ability to conduct cross-border counterfire defensive strikes to defend their troops that are being attacked from across the border in Russia. You know, we are very, very much focused, and we've talked about this before, on ensuring that Ukraine has what it needs to be able to preserve its sovereignty and take back occupied territory. And that's going to continue to be our focus. The bottom line is we want to see Ukraine win in this conflict. And when they feel that it's time, Ukraine feels that it's time to go to the negotiating table, we want them to do so with as strong a hand as possible. And I would point you to Secretary Austin's comments at Ramstein last week, where he highlighted there is no one capability, there is no silver bullet that is going to enable Ukraine to succeed. It's about taking all of the capabilities that they have and employing them in a way that gets them closer to success and having that stronger hand at the negotiating table. So again, as this battlefield has evolved, our support to Ukraine has evolved. But again, as of right now, the policy has not changed. I'll just leave it there.
The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, Air Force Major General, at a Pentagon news conference. A couple of articles from Reuters. One is President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday that the West would be directly fighting with Russia if it allowed Ukraine to strike Russian territory with Western-made long-range missiles, a move he said would alter the nature and scope of the conflict. And President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Thursday that Ukrainian forces had anticipated Moscow's counteroffensive in the Russian region of Kursk, His first comments on the pushback this week, more than a month after Ukraine's cross-border incursion. And finally, on Washington Today, from the Tennessean newspaper, Jim Sasser, the last Democrat to represent Tennessee in the U.S. Senate, who later went on to serve as U.S. ambassador to China during the Clinton administration, died on Tuesday. He was 87. A statement from his children, Gray and Elizabeth Sasser, as his family and former staff will attest, Dad loved his family, the state of Tennessee, his years serving in the U.S. Senate, and old cars too, and he loved them in that order. He believed in the nobility of public service and the transformational power of government. C-SPAN interviewed Senator Sasser in 1992, and he talked about how seeing poverty firsthand growing up affected him.
I remember as a very young boy, when I first started to school, at this time we were living in a rural area in the western part of Tennessee. My father was overseas in the South Pacific. This was during the Second World War. And in this small rural community, I saw for the first time poverty. And I saw many of my classmates in this small rural school were deprived, no question about it. They didn't have, some of them didn't have shoes in the wintertime. Now, that's inconceivable for us to think of that now in 1990. But in the 1940s, in areas of the South, children would go barefooted almost the year round. These were the children of of tenant farmers in western Tennessee. And many times they would have no lunch at school. They would get an orange, for example, for Christmas. That would be their Christmas present. And I think seeing that had a very great influence on me. And I felt as a youngster, I saw very clearly and very early the injustice of what I perceived to be injustice, and felt that it was unfair, and felt that I wanted to, I guess as I grew older, try to do something to give everybody a fair chance, I suppose.
Part of a C-SPAN interview with James Sasser in 1992 when he was a Democratic U.S. Senator from Tennessee. He served in that position from 1977 to 1995, then became U.S. Ambassador to China in the Bill Clinton administration for 3 years. James Sasser has died at the age of 87. Al Gore, former Vice President and former U.S. Senator, Democrat of Tennessee, posting on X, "It is impossible to put into words how much Jim Sasser meant to me and my family. He was a man of outstanding character and conviction, a great United States Senator, and later an outstanding diplomat in the truest sense of the word." Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.